Here's what I'd like you to do for just a few minutes in your group. I'd like you to take a few minutes as a group and try to find as many verses as you can in the Bible through your collective knowledge there that speak of the sanctity of life, the value of human life. So just have someone jot down the passages, and then we'll go around. I have a spokesperson from each group share one verse. So take about just 3 minutes. Think of as many verses as you can in the Bible that speak of the value of human life. But here's what I'd like you to do. We'll just give one spokesman from each group just a chance to share the verse, share the reference, and if you would read the verse too out loud for everyone to hear. This Cliff has volunteered you and then he left. So what's going on?
That way you can hand it off.
Okay. Are you ready to go, Andy? You got a verse?
I don't know if anyone. Well, we have it, so we're first.
You're first. You get to go.
Psalms 139, 13 and 14. It says, "You made all the delicate interparts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous." And they're talking about your workmanship. How we know it. How well we know it.
Okay. Excellent. Psalm 139 as Steve preached on last week. I think last week or recently. This group over here, give us a verse.
Job 31:15. Did not he who made me in the womb make him, and did not one fashion us in the womb?
Okay, excellent. Job, we'll go right here. Yes, Melody.
Psalm 49, 7 and 8. No one can redeem the life of another or give to God a ransom for them. The ransom for life is costly. No payment is ever enough.
Wow,
Oh, that's a
very
good
good
one.
verse. Excellent. All right, we'll take the other group in the middle. Jan?
Galatians 1:15. But when he who set me apart before I was born, and who called me by his grace.
Very good. Before you were born, God set you apart. True of Paul, true of us as well. Over here in the back. Have we taken all your verses?
Genesis 2:7. The Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being.
Okay, excellent. Contrary to the reigning theory in our world, we did not arise from lower forms. God specially created man from the dust of the ground. Very good. Hope you guys have a good list because we've already stolen 5 good ones.
I was surprised this one's still on. In Jeremiah 1:5, I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb.
Okay.
Before you were born, I set you apart and appointed you as my prophet to the nations.
Okay, excellent. All right, great job. Now you can turn your chairs back. All right, so we're jumping into our first ethical topic today. We're talking about the very important issue of abortion. And like so many of the topics we cover, we want to differentiate between the issue of abortion and those who promote it and those who've experienced it. So statistics say 1 in 4 American women will have an abortion. So take our church of about 250 people. If half are women, 125, that means that between, my math is right, between around 30 of the women on average would have had an abortion. And so we need to have compassion and understanding on those who've gone through that. We need to encourage them if they've had an abortion out of convenience or for whatever reason, other than we'll talk about a tubal pregnancy where obviously the mother could not survive. But there is forgiveness from God, and there is restoration. The church I came from at Calvary, 4,000 people, they had a large ministry for women who've had abortions, dozens and dozens who suffer from the effects of that, the emotional effects, the physical effects. But we want to look at primarily what does the Bible say? What should we as Christians think about this important moral issue? So notice a few things right off the bat. The definition of abortion is the termination of a pregnancy by the death of the embryo or fetus. And I'll use these 3 words interchangeably: embryo, fetus, baby in the womb. And I'll tell you why that is. So if I use the word embryo or fetus, it's because it's a medical term that's appropriate, but we don't want to fall into the trap of minimizing the fact that it is a human life. If you look up on the Planned Parenthood website, the definition ends at the termination of a pregnancy. It does not acknowledge that it is a embryo, baby, or fetus. Ron, did you have a comment?
Yeah, at what point does a fetus have a soul?
Oh, man. We will get to that, yeah. In every class, there's a student that's thinking 10 steps ahead. Yeah. No, it's a great question. And what we'll do is we'll try to provide room each week for questions. However, we're just going to present half the lesson on abortion today. The other half next week I won't be here, not because I'm avoiding the topic, but because I'm preaching in church the next 2 Sundays after this. But yes, raise those questions and we'll try to answer them as we go. But let's hopefully get past the first slide before we throw another Ron curveball at me. So here's the ethical dilemma. And one of the things that's important to do in every ethical issue is ask yourself, why would someone believe or hold to the position that's different than mine? We should never think if someone differs from me on an ethical issue, it's because they're just crazy. No, we want to enter into their world and ask, why would they think this? And so we're going to do a little bit of that today. If you read my chapter in the ethics book, you'll know that I had to write one of the characters who was pro-choice, pro-abortion. I had to write her position as honestly as I could without making her look bad. Now, that's the other thing. To be honest, we don't want to paint the other people in the worst light possible and paint ourselves in the best light possible. We believe, because the Word of God is sufficient, that I can honestly look at those who disagree with me, understand their position, and honestly argue, here's why I disagree. So here are some of the ethical dilemmas in this issue. Should a woman have to carry to term a baby that she doesn't want? Now just enter into that for a moment. As a man, I can't personally, but seeing my wife go through that, what if a woman finds herself pregnant with a baby she doesn't want for whatever reason? She doesn't feel like she can take care of the child emotionally, financially, she's had an abusive boyfriend, or she's been raped. What do we do with that? Should a woman have to carry that baby? It's an important question. Who has a say whether a baby in the womb should live or not? Typically we think, well, it's just the mother, she's the only one, but I've met men that say, I got my girlfriend pregnant, I wanted that child, and she didn't want it, and now 20 years later, I don't have any kids, and I could have had a son, and they're devastated. Or, if you can imagine this, if you have grown adult children, what if your daughter or daughter-in-law got pregnant and they just said, you know what, we just don't want another baby? How would you feel as a grandparent if they said we're going to have an abortion? So this is an important question. Who has a say? Is the fetus a person? This, by the way, if you say, Mark, what is the crux of the matter of abortion? It's this question right here. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Peter Singer, professor at Princeton. This is why you should never give respect to people just because they're academics. He says if we compare, it's true, don't be impressed by PhDs. If we compare a severely defective human infant with a non-human animal, a dog or a pig, for example, we will often find the non-human to have superior capacities, both actual and potential, for rationality, self-consciousness, communication, and anything else that can be plausibly considered morally significant. Humans who bestow superior value on the lives of all human beings solely because they're members of our own species are judging along lines strikingly similar to those used by white racists. And notice his position. He's professor of bioethics at the Center for Human Values.
Wow.
This guy is a radical ethicist. He says a healthy and smart golden retriever ought to have more rights than a mentally or physically disabled baby. Because he said what makes you valuable is not being a human, it's having the ability for these things here. Here's another interesting quote to give you something to think about. It's by a Christian theologian. No woman wants an abortion if she wants an ice cream cone or a Porsche. She wants an abortion as an animal caught in a trap and wants to gnaw off its own leg. This reminds us that while some women do use abortion as a method of birth control or out of convenience, for most women, it's a desperate situation. They're put in a position where they feel trapped. and many times with a feeling of hopelessness or maybe pressure from someone, family members. Sometimes it's parents who say to a young girl, listen, you're 18, you got pregnant, this is going to ruin your life. You've got to abort this baby and so you can go on with your life. Even Hollywood celebrities recently at the Oscars have been thanking, I'd like to thank my abortion for giving me the freedom to have the career I've had.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So there are people like that, but I think Frederica Matthews Green is correct that for many women, abortion is an unwelcome choice, but one they often feel they have no decision about. As you may know, the landmark Supreme Court decision, Roe v. Wade in 1973, made abortion legal in all 50 states. In the first trimester, I have to explain this to college young men because they often don't know details about pregnancy and things like that. That's the first 13 weeks of pregnancy. My guess is that all of you men understand that, but I even have to draw some things on the board to help men understand this issue, young men, because they often don't know. I didn't know either at that age. First 13 weeks of pregnancy, this law said that the state could not regulate abortion. It was wide open, and no one could limit or regulate the first 13 weeks. Roe v. Wade said during the second trimester, states may regulate abortion. They may put rules on it, connected to it. And then during the third trimester, states may regulate or prohibit abortion, except in cases where the mother's health is at risk. And this is one of the big questions in abortion is, at what point, if the doctor says to you ladies or to you men, if you have this baby, if you bring this baby to full term, it will kill you, what do you do? Do you take the life of the child? Do you let the mother die? This is a real situation. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen sometimes. The same day the Supreme Court passed Roe v. Wade, it passed another law, Doe v. Bolton, which expanded the notion of health to justify abortion for virtually any reason. So remember that last statement there, except in cases where the mother's health is at risk. This next ruling on the same day basically said that, I'm jumping ahead here, that the woman's health could include emotional health, financial health, for pretty much any reason. She could override any state laws. 1992, this is a Pennsylvania case. The Supreme Court in Planned Parenthood versus Casey's. This was based in a case in Pennsylvania. Upheld provisions requiring informed consent. That is, before now, there was no law making abortion providers tell a woman exactly what an abortion was. In fact, they would tell women, you have a blob of cells in you, that's all it is. They lied. And there was one invention that has changed the landscape of abortion entirely. Anybody know what that invention is? Ultrasound. For the first time, a woman could see inside her womb to see that this was not just a clump of cells, it was in fact a recognizable human child. Now, whenever my daughters get pregnant and they show me that, I'm like, I don't see it, but I believe you, it's there. Now they have 3D ultrasounds, which are much clearer, and in fact, there's some amazing videos on YouTube that are dramatizations of the formation of life. It's just amazing the detail that they know now that we have that ability. David, did you have a comment?
No, I was just going to say about the 3D.
Yeah, the 3D is truly amazing. You notice a couple other things here. 24-hour waiting period. And I think that's still a law where if a woman wants an abortion, she goes to the clinic and they give her information, she has to come back the next day. Parental consent for minors. Before this law, you could be 14 or 15, have gotten pregnant by your boyfriend or a grown man, a family member, in the case of incest, and you could get a surgical procedure done without your parents knowing it. And truly astounding. This was an important law that helped provide some medical protections. A really important thing happened in the Planned Parenthood versus Casey law. Justice Kennedy wrote, "At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence." Now let that settle in for just a moment. That I have the right to define my own existence? Guess what issue in our day and today has come back and been built on that statement? Gender identity. That's right. In other words, I can say I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, and Justice Kennedy said in 1992, 30 years ago, hard to believe 1992 was 30 years ago, that I have the right and I should have the legal standing to be able to say, I am a woman. And it used to be that, okay, if people felt that way, they would often change their outward appearance, like Bruce Jenner into Caitlyn Jenner. Now you don't even have to do that. I could just simply say, I am a woman on the inside. I define my existence, therefore let me into the locker room, the bathroom, privileges and rights and resources for women. That's the world we live in. We'll get to that in November. So you can define your own existence. It's the right to define your own concept of meaning, of the universe, of the mystery of human life. One commentator said he was paraphrasing the serpent in the garden. You can be what you want to be. You don't have to be limited to a creature made in God's image. Some facts: 1.3 million abortions are performed in the U.S. every year, 45 to 50 million worldwide. So you take that over the last, 40, 50 years, perhaps 1 billion people worldwide have been aborted. And contra the environmentalists, the earth is made that we could support that many people. The problem is the earth is not able to. The problem is corrupt governments and corporations that misuse resources. We won't go there because that's too big of a discussion. Only 2% of abortions are performed in the U.S. because of rape, incest, or birth defects. One of the main pro-choice arguments is, well, what about this situation? And what we don't want to do is build an argument or an ethic on this based on these, but we do need to address them, and we will next week in the video I record. In Washington, D.C., abortions outnumber live births. So more babies aborted than born in the District of Columbia. Abortion represents a $700 million a year industry. This is why they fight so ferociously, because it is a huge profit to those who run the clinics. And as you know, the government continually gives tens, if not hundreds of millions to Planned Parenthood. Does Planned Parenthood do some good health issues for women? Yes, but the vast majority of their income, the vast majority of their efforts are geared toward abortion.
And Mark, I think when Trump was in office, didn't he cut funding to Planned Parenthood?
He did or tried to, I can't remember, it was one of those two, yeah, which is something even previous conservative presidents like George W. Bush never did. It's a powerful lobby. This is sad. The U.S. is the world leader in teenage abortions with 250,000 a year. One thing interesting is we often are told by pro-choice people is that America is the most conservative, stuck-in-the-mud, old-fashioned Victorian nations. Actually, most of the nations in the world have much stronger laws presenting life than America does. We're in the top 5 with China and Russia, North Korea. That's where we rank as far as our stand on abortion. Over 10% of abortions in the U.S. are performed in the second trimester. And I'm not going to, in this class, either this week or next week, go into the details of what the medical procedure is, but I do spell it out in the book. It's gruesome, quite frankly. There's nothing, it's not like having your spleen removed or gallbladder or something like that. The effects of abortion. Women with previous abortions suffer later from higher incidence of tubal pregnancies, which I assume most of you know what that is, but in a woman's fallopian tubes connecting her ovaries to her womb, that tube, if the embryo implants in there and grows, it will burst the tube, it will kill the woman, and so that has to be removed. That is not considered an abortion from a Christian perspective. It is an unviable fertilization of an egg. We do still believe that's a human, because as we'll see in just a moment, conception begins life, but at the same time, it's not in a place where it could ever grow. Higher levels of incontinence, infertility, miscarriages, breast cancer, and fetal death. So part of our concern in talking about abortion is we want to end this issue for the good of women's health, not just for the baby, but abortion is not good for women's health. Psychological effects include guilt, anxiety, depression, sense of loss, and remorse. Again, this doesn't just happen to women. A man in my church when I was a pastor just was heartbroken. He was in his late 30s. He had pressured his girlfriend into an abortion. And he said, and he used to keep track. My son would have been 13 this year. My son would have been 14. And he said, whenever I try to, go out with a girl, he said, I want to be married so badly. I go out with a girl and I feel the need to tell her this, the relationship ends. And he said, I fear I will never have a child that I want so badly. Husbands and boyfriends, doctors and nurses all suffer long-term negative effects. Has anybody seen the movie Unplanned about the abortion clinic owner that became a Christian and walked out on that and is now pro-life? An amazing story. Abby Johnson. If you've not seen the movie Unplanned or read the book, I strongly encourage you to do that. She was a young woman, the most successful abortion clinic provider in Texas, was winning awards for the volume of abortions her clinic was performing, until one day when the doctor said, I need your help, come in here. And then she sees it for the first time, which she had never seen before, what was taking place down the hall, and that broke her. It's a powerful story. So what is the heart of the pro-choice argument? It's a woman's right to do what she wants with her own body. Okay, so that's at the heart of it. And to some degree, we agree. No woman should be subjected to something that she does not consent to, whether it be sexual, whether it be anything. And this is something that's not been addressed in Christian churches much. Inappropriate touching, inappropriate comments directed toward women. That should never happen. It should never be such that a woman, a Christian woman, or any other woman experiences at the hands or the mouth of a man a comment or an action that makes her feel uncomfortable. We should protect women, and we should not allow this to become acceptable. Spousal abuse. There's a huge problem in the church as a whole of hidden spousal abuse, where you have dysfunctional marriage relationships where men strike women, strangle women, choke women. And does it happen the other way? Yeah. When I was a pastor, I had a case where the wife was beating up the husband. Like, that should never be. It should never be. So we understand at the root, there's partial truth here, but with so much error, as you know, truth is always only partial. We recognize as Christians, none of us have the right to do what we want with our bodies. 1 Corinthians 6, 18 to 20. You're not your own. You're bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body. We also acknowledge this, that from the moment of conception, this is a medical fact. This is not a pro-choice or pro-life argument. From the moment of conception, when the sperm and the egg unite, that becomes a unique individual genetically different from the mother and different from the father, although containing both their genes. And therefore, we see through this argument and say this embryo, this fetus, is not part of your body. It is in your body, but it is not part of your body. Another argument is abortion ought to be a human right. And again, this is being pushed on many countries in the world by the United States. So much of American foreign aid to countries in need is contingent upon pushing abortion and pushing the LGBTQ agenda. So that countries, especially, by the way, there are very many conservative countries in Africa, in South America, and Asia that say, we need your money, America and Europe, but not at the expense of changing our ethics. So we are not by any means a righteous country in comparison to many others around the world. A third argument is to deny abortion is to enslave women. And part of that arises out of the belief that children are a handicap or a negative. They're a burden as opposed to a blessing. And again, as Christians, we realize the Bible says, children are a heritage from the Lord. They're a blessing. But in the world setting, children are going to cost you money. They're going to keep you from doing what you want. And so they would say to make a woman bear a child is to enslave her. All children should be wanted children. Boy, that hits you in the feels, doesn't it? We certainly want that to be true, but we acknowledge that we live in a fallen world. And this is where Christians, again, people always blame Christians for all the problems. If you're really pro-life, why are there children in the foster system? Well, there's no group that adopts and fosters children at a higher rate than Christians, by far. So the problem is not that we're not trying our best, and maybe we could do more, But the problem is we live in a fallen world. And we agree children should be wanted. But to say a child should not come into the world if it's not wanted, here's my question. If the child in the womb is not wanted, therefore we can get rid of them, why not the 1-month-old? That child could not be wanted. And why not the 85-year-old? Right? See, we're setting a precedent here. Is a person's value resting in whether they're wanted or not, or is their value rooted in who they are as being made in God's image? Denying access to poor women is discriminatory and a violation of reproductive justice. So the pro-choice movement, they're masters of twisting language so that if you oppose this, you're opposing justice. You're not giving poor women the access they need. And finally, abortion is redefined as inducing fetal demise. Well, that's a great way to blow smoke into the issue and try to conceal it. So here is the heart of the pro-abortion movement, and this is the pro-abortion ideology, and this is where we need to realize this is at the heart of it. A fetus is not a person until it is born. Personhood is defined in operational terms here. In other words, unless someone can do certain things, they should not be granted the rights and protections of personhood. So you have to be able to do certain things in order to qualify as a person. So the status of personhood with all its rights and protections is only granted to those who possess observable traits. So who grants that? And that was the question before Roe v. Wade. The attorney that went before the Supreme Court to argue for abortion said, Your Honors, who do you think should decide whether the fetus in the womb should live? 12 old white men or the mother? Well, no, actually what she said is, who do you think should decide when the fetus in the womb becomes human? Well, that was a deceiving tactic, because the question of humanity, humanhood, is a scientific question. It's not a moral question. But she raised that, and you know what the justices did? These really bright judges? They're like, you're right. We shouldn't be involved in this. Let's just leave it to the mother. Total abdication of leadership here. Because this view says unless someone outside the fetus grants them personhood, they have no protections under the law. And this springs from a materialistic worldview that says we're just human matter, and a behavioristic worldview that says your value depends on your ability to do things, that denies that an individual is anything more than physical. So this is the chart. I'm going to give another chart next week that shows the pro-life position. This says while we have to acknowledge that the fetus in the womb is human, it's a scientific fact. The genes are human, they're Homo sapiens. Anyone who argues that doesn't know what they're talking about, because there's no question. It's a scientific question, not open to discussion. It's like saying, does gravity exist? Well, yes. Well, maybe I don't believe it is, and I'm going to jump off this building. Well, whether you believe it or not, the gravity is going to kick in. What they've done, though, is they've drawn a line between being human and being a person. So we grant that the fetus is human, the embryo is human, but we don't grant that it has personhood. And therefore, we can deny the baby in the womb of rights because it doesn't qualify as a person. As we'll see next week, the Christian position is being human equals being a person. That is, again, because we're made in the image of God, by the very fact that we're human, it means that from the moment of conception, that one is a person.
But since they have come out with the echoes, haven't they been able to establish that it is a person, even though it's small at first?
No, great question. No, because personhood to them is defined by being able to do certain things. It has nothing to do with what they are. We'll grant that it's a human, certain stage, fingers, toes, heartbeat, eyelids, sucks the thumb, all that's human. But personhood is something in this view that must be granted to them for protection. This is why, once a baby is born, if a doctor were to intentionally harm the baby minutes after its birth, he would go to prison if he was convicted for murder. But a few minutes before, while the baby's in the womb, if the mother says, you know what, I don't want to do this, I don't want this baby. Now, there's very few doctors that would make that quick transition, but she would have the right to do that. Why? Because in the state's view, the baby, unless it gets out of the womb, is not granted personhood.
Sounds like the exact same argument for pro-slavery.
It is the exact same argument. Bizarrely enough, they even denied that African Americans or black people were human. They tried to do there, because if you do that, it's easy to do this. You eliminate this and you eliminate that. And they did, take away their person.
3/5 of a person.
3/5 of a person.
Wow.
That's right.
It's crazy.
Same argument for euthanasia.
Yeah, absolutely. Same argument for any diminishing of any personhood or any person. You know, this person doesn't deserve to live. Again, now we're not talking about perhaps, justice system or a capital crime, but yeah, euthanasia, same thing. This old person has passed beyond the level of usefulness, or they can't do certain things, and therefore, we should be able to let them go or end their life, as they do in a lot of northern European countries. When we get to euthanasia, sometimes you don't have a choice. I see another hand, David?
When I've been talking to pro-choice people, the question I pose to them is, what does abortion, the Holocaust, slavery, and women's suffrage all have in common?
Are you gonna tell me the answer? You're gonna make me wait.
No,
Okay.
They all deny the personhood of
Yes.
the object.
Yeah.
And it catches them because a lot of them, being pro-woman, are all over the women's suffrage.
Yes. Right.
But they can't accept the argument.
Yeah, that's right. So this is the crux of the issue. Does being a human automatically make you a person? And again, if you've never thought about it, it's like, duh, how could you not think that? But this is the argument being made. They've drawn this line. And we'll see when we get to the issue of sexuality, they draw the line between biological sex and gender. Same thing. They're separating what God intended to be together. So a fetus is not a person until it's born. Human value, they would say, is an achievement rather than an endowment. You have to be able to do certain things. Attainment of personhood is a process. What's the process for most? Being born. However, there's no logical reason to say then at the moment of birth there's something radically different than there was a minute or a few minutes before. And this is why Peter Singer, again, at Princeton's Center for Human Dignity, says up to 2 weeks after a baby's born, the mother ought to have the right not to give it away to adoption, but to end the life of the child. Up to 2 weeks afterward.
And what's the 2 weeks about? Like, what about 2 weeks and 1 day?
Yeah, right. Or 2 months or 2 years.
Or because they can change their mind.
Yes, because Peter Singer says it's not till about 2 weeks after the baby's born that we really know at a greater degree if this child has disabilities or handicaps that the parents won't be able to care for. So again, Peter Singer's being consistent.
Yeah.
He says if we're granting this child personhood, then why just make birth? There's a lot of other factors to consider, and he's right. And he and another philosopher wrote a book entitled Should the Baby Live, in which they argue this exact thing. Jonathan?
Ask Peter Singer's mother what she thought.
Oh, when we get to euthanasia, we'll talk about that, because he was very inconsistent on that issue. So thank you, Gene, for bringing it up. Jonathan?
I've heard the same argument as it relates to a failed abortion. So a live birth following an abortion, in our current law, the doctor is not allowed to kill it. But if the mother made the decision to end the pregnancy, and the doctor, by his own negligence, doesn't make a successful abortion,
yeah.
Why does then the mother have to take care of the child from then on?
That's right.
And, it causes all kinds of problems as well.
Yeah.
It's also interesting that, in a traffic accident that kills a baby in the womb, they are granted personhood as it relates to, criminal charges and all that kind of stuff, even though they're not born.
Yeah. Until recently, I forget which state it was. I want to say Florida, but it might not be Florida. One of the states just passed a law that if a pregnant woman is murdered or killed, that the embryo, whether the mother wants the baby or not, cannot be counted as a separate individual. So there is a state that has broken that ground. So personhood is granted by some authority. Here's philosopher Marianne Warren. she proposes 5 criteria that you have to meet in order to gain personhood.
Here we go.
There we go, is right. Consciousness of things external and internal to oneself, and especially the ability to feel pain. Reasoning, self-motivated activity, that is activity independent of genetic or external control. Movement that you decide to do, so a mere instinct or reaction. When each of my kids, when they were born, we put them in the bath for the first time, they do this motion, because they're being leaned back into water. They would say, no, not that kind of thing. The ability to communicate with an indefinite number of contents and topics. Yeah. This woman makes her living as a philosopher. So, and not to put her down as a woman, but because many men agree with her on this. And the presence of self-concepts and self-awareness. You understand that you're an individual different. So her conclusion is a person must possess all 5 of these cognitive abilities to qualify as a person.
Does that mean when you're asleep, you're no longer a person?
Oh. There's another student that's jumping ahead of me. So yes, lacking even one ability, notice the next phrase, even if it's likely to develop, disqualifies a human as a person.
Oh, wow.
This is what drives the pro-choice movement. It doesn't matter if this child, nurtured in a mother's womb and raised, will gain these things. At any moment, if this embryo does not have these abilities, then it does not have personhood, does not have protections.
I'm just wondering, where'd that stuff come from?
Another student, there it is right there. They provide no justification for their criteria. They don't say, here's why we argue this. They just say, this is what we think qualifies you as personhood. They don't make a good argument. This is where pro-choice movement descends into ideology. We want to have power over certain people, and that's really at the root of it. And since some women don't want to carry this child, then we have to provide justification for her to end the child's life. Notice the criteria are vague. Communicate with an indefinite number of contents and topics. I teach first hour every day at the college. Almost none of my 18-year-olds have the ability to communicate with even a definite number of contents and topics. So notice, this would rob personhood from infants. Think of a 2-week-old, 2-month-old, 1-year-old, dementia patients, the severely mentally disabled, people in a coma, someone under anesthesia for surgery, or if you fall asleep. Same kind of thing.
We all sleep, so then
at certain points, you would say, but they're going to wake up. No. Remember, she said, even if it's likely to occur in the future.
Helen Keller, you think about the ways, all the things that she was not able to do in order
Yes.
to communicate. And her life, Helen Keller's a great example
Yeah,
of a non-person, according to them.
that's right.
Wow.
That's right.
Yeah,
School.
that's right.
So this is an attempt then to take away from the embryo in the womb personhood. And this is the arguments that they pose. So she and others would deny personhood to many of those in the list above, and they argue that parents ought to have the right to terminate the life of a baby up until 2 weeks after birth. So here's what we're going to do next time. Next time we're going to begin to work backwards through these arguments and present a pro-life argument. But at the heart of it, if we go back to this slide here, we're going to argue that being human equals being a person, which means that from the moment of conception, again, and this shows you how worldviews influence people. If we take this materialistic worldview, there's no God, we evolved. The only thing unique about you from animals is just that you have higher reasoning abilities. Then this makes sense. Someone has to grant who gets to be a person and who doesn't. Unfortunately, that's not the world we live in.
No, fortunately, that's not the
Thank you. Fortunately, the elders. They're here to correct bad teaching. That's good. I'm all for that. Fortunately, this is not, unfortunately for them, fortunately for us, we live in God's world, which means that human beings are unique. We are made in God's image, and that by itself gives us the rights, the dignity, the sanctity of personhood, and that's at the root of this issue. So next week we're going to look at and we're going to rebut all these arguments and show from a Christian perspective how we should view life as valuable, and then we'll deal with some of the sticky, thornier questions about this, because there are. If you've ever worked with a pregnancy resource center or talked with someone who just says, I don't know if I can do this, we want to have sympathy, compassion, and yet speak the truth. One thing I like about that Unplanned movie was Abby Johnson, as she ran this abortion clinic. There were Christians that would stand behind the fence as she would pull her car in every day. And they wouldn't heckle her. They wouldn't shout things and hold up signs. They would just say, hey, we'd love to talk to you. We'd love to tell you, why we think that what you're doing is not right, and to give life a chance. And they basically spoke to her as another person, calling her out of love to hear the truth. And this went on for several years. And she did not like those people. She wouldn't talk with them. But when she sat in that abortion with that doctor, she knew who to go to. And we need to be the kind of people that a woman considering abortion, or a woman who's had one, can come to and say, help me to deal with this thing in my life. That's the heart of Christ, to call sinners to himself. And we all need that in order to come to Christ. People who've had abortions, people who come out of broken, dysfunctional, abusive homes, people that are confused about sexuality, they should know they can come to Christians, and we will speak the truth to them in love and help them through these things. This is what it means to be salt and light. Yes?
So that's the ministry of aligned ministry.
Yes.
Now, so when clients come in, we assess them. Are they abortion-minded, they're parent, or they're abortion-vulnerable? And we try to get them to that ultrasound, which 6 to 12 weeks we are about to give the ultrasound. And when they see that baby, when we get them in there, they just react like, oh my word, I had no idea that we could see the heartbeat.
Yeah.
And if anybody's in doubt at that point, many times their hearts return to one parent.
Right.
So what a cool thing the ultrasound machine has been.
Yeah. And we're very, very thankful for Align Life Ministries, used to be Susquehanna Valley Pregnancy Center, for what they do, because that's at the front lines of saving lives. And even if we can't do that, the fact that God's raised up people. And by the way, I think the number of pregnancy resource centers that outnumber abortion clinics now, it's something like 10 to 1 around the country. And that's what a way to praise God for that.
And part of Align's vision is pretty cool, because there are no abortion clinics in Lancaster County, but they're all in Philadelphia and all in poor neighborhoods on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And very few crisis pregnancies in those areas, because they are expensive to run and they're difficult to do. So I love how Align is aligning with crisis pregnancy centers in the city, that they can help resource them and give them what they need, because that is the front lines of abortion compared to, our area right here. We have a lot of crisis pregnancy activity here, and there just needs to be much more in the neighborhoods where the abortion clinics are.
Yeah, that's so true.
Another thing is, how radical should we be as Christians? Because I've talked to quite a few radical Christians who go and protest and end up in jail.
Yeah. Has anybody ever heard the story of Randy Alcorn? He's a wonderful Christian writer. When he was a young pastor, he was protesting, and he got arrested several times. He was not doing it in a hateful way. He was just trying to call people who are going into abortion clinics not to do that. And he was assessed a fine of $19,000. This is back in the late 70s. And he said, I will never give a dime to them. So he was a pastor. He resigned his church. Someone said, you can come live in my house for free. Someone else said, you can drive my car. Because if he made any more than minimum wage, it would have garnished his wages. And he talks about what it cost him and his family to speak out. And yet God has multiplied his ministry all over, because he was not willing to cave on that area and yet he recommends that we do it in a way that recognizes that the women going into these clinics need someone that says, I can help you, and we will provide resources. Becky?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, what you were saying about being a salt and light, and what Steve Lever actually shared, I think, last week, about not being a thorn in the flesh. I guess I just felt like I want us as, AGF or a group of people to feel like if someone who had an abortion can come sit in this class about abortion and not feel condemned by her comments or laughing, like I feel for them.
Yeah.
And also another point, we have the women's ministry put together a memorial garden that's not completely together. We actually have the bench in the back of our van we're gonna put, but we're dedicating it to all babies lost by miscarriage, abortion, or stillbirth. And I just desire for Bethany ABF, people who made that hard decision to come here and feel here.
Yeah, absolutely. I went over there this week and saw the garden. It's a beautiful way to memorialize and remember children that have been lost. Yeah, thank you. It's a good reminder. Let us never behave in a way that would make a person who's had abortion or struggling with their sexuality or identity, or has made any decision in the past that they feel like, I wish I had not done that, to feel ostracized. Speak the truth in love, but show them love and say we are here to support you and strengthen you, because that's what Christ does for us. Okay, let's bow our heads and pray. Father, thank you for our time, and Lord, give us a Christian mind, a biblical mind about these important issues, so that we can be salt and light, so that we can shine the light of Christ clearly, so that we might honor you, and so that we might invite others to come to know you. We pray this in Jesus' name.